The Pit Press Podcast.
Right on, launches from downtown. No. Van Horn, no. And that's it. New Mexico wins it.
Some big-time games and shots. How about this? Where have you been? MCL knocking him down twice. Looking top and keeping it alive. House from deep. Got it. This kid is amazing. This is what got them in trouble. That ball screen giving up the mid-range. Look at this foul. House again. It's topping. Fifth assist.
And New Mexico's going to dribble out the clock. The Lobos three-peat as conference tournament champions Kendall Williams fires the ball into the air. But New Mexico wins it this afternoon 64-58 over San Diego State. And the Lobos claim the Mountain West Conference's automatic bid into the NCAA tournament.
Finds Becker. Petrides for the lead. Petrides hits the triple. Air Force on top.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Ryan Tamori. Welcome to another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. That was obviously the dagger when Air Force visited UNM. I'll get to the panel here, and then we're going to break down UNM's 78-77 loss. I don't even have that in front of me. My God. UNM did lose by 1 to Air Force. And I will start with probably the biggest question, and it was posed on Twitter. Might start with that. But anyway, as always, I'm joined by my business partner in this endeavor, Mr. Eric Moulton. Hey, man, how are you?
Could be a whole lot better, Ryan. Still really disappointed from yesterday's really letdown. A game that should, I wouldn't say a gimme win, but 18-point favorite. Kind of did more damage than they could have gained from this game, but we'll get into it.
And all the way from the Bay Area, a two-time offensive state lineman for San Juan Mendoza, played for Damian Segura at St. Pius. Mr. Richard Thompson, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, man. The birds are chirping, the sun is shining, and ready to talk about this game and some other Mountain West action. So thanks for having me back on.
As always, happy to have you on. And a Lobo fan since 1970 and the voice of the Western New Mexico Mustangs. His name is Mr. Ed Nunez, who's still stuck in Silver City, and I'm sorry about that.
Escape from Silver City comes in a couple hours, and I don't mind being here, but we were hoping to get out last night. Didn't work out. Law of averages, Murphy's Law in effect. But here I am, man. Looking forward to talking about the game.
UNM, yeah, and I did have the score right. I thought I wrote it down. That's terrible on my part. 78-77. I don't know how you guys want to break down this game. And before I forget, other advertisers, hey, if you're looking for a place to watch the Lobos when they are on the road, head over to Turquoise Desert Tap Room. It's only a few minutes away from Santa Ana Star Casino. Catch the Lobos' other college basketball games, NBA, NHL action. Stop by for food, drinks, and football. Stop by for food, drinks, and basketball. Turquoise Desert Tap Room also serves local brews on tap. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Turquoise Desert Tap Room. Another long 7-8 months away from football season. And Abrazo Homes. They are Lobo owned and Lobo operated, and a proud supporter of the University of New Mexico Athletic Department and its student athletes. Join the movement and help Abrazo Homes build momentum by contributing to the 505 Sports Venture Foundation or the UNM Lobo Club. When you buy an Abrazo home, you become a part of the Abrazo Familia. Looking to build the perfect home in New Mexico? Find them at abrazohomes.com. Oh, man, I don't know where to start. I think maybe with the final sequence with Dent getting the ball in, and it was almost like, it was eerily similar to Colorado State. I thought Jacob Neff was going to be joining us. He loves Pete Gillen. Here's Pete Gillen on after the Petrides 3 that put them up 1 point.
Get it to Dent to go to the basket. They can't guard him. Don't let him get the ball. Question was whether New Mexico called a timeout. New Mexico does not call a timeout. Dent has 3 game winners. They're all downhill. Yep. Get it to Dent. They can't stay in front of him. I'd put 2 guys on Dent. I'd have a guy in front of him and behind him. Weber's guarding Abseal, front of him. There's a timeout remaining for New Mexico.
I know this is rather long, but we'll get to that as well.
Question is about the substitution here for the Lobos. Baker's going to head back to the bench. Mashburn out there along with Washington and Dent in the backcourt again. Dent has 3 game winners, including earlier this week against Colorado State. Here he comes again.
Rick, I'm going to start with you. That was the whole after the Petritus 3, and I didn't see it at the game, but you said that Air Force head coach Joe Scott was on the court. You saw it on television. Can you break that down?
Well, listening to it again just now, I guess it sounds like they made the 3. Baker was at the table ready to check in, and for some reason he didn't check in after the made shot. So the game's paused for a second. The coach kind of walked onto the court, and then there was about 10 seconds as you heard the stall on the radio call there. At that point, in my mind, Air Force is set up with 2 guys already on Dent. You can see they're prepared for the play. So they were ready for it. And in my mind, Pitino should have called timeout there. But I just had some question about what took so long for us to inbound the ball and why there was a stall. If there wasn't a stall and they could have just inbounded the ball, I'm all for letting Dent just grabbing it and go. But at that point, when there was a stop, they saw what was coming. They actually set up defense properly, unlike Colorado State did just a few nights ago. They pressured the ball early, and the wall actually stopped Dent, where he had to kick it out to Washington. Washington hesitated and then had to shoot a tough pull-up. So I just had some question about why, after the made 3 by Air Force, it took so long to allow UNM to get the ball in, and why Baker didn't end up checking in. It was all kind of strange, as you heard on the call there. It took a really long time.
It sounded like Pete Gillen and the play-by-play commentator didn't know that. Here's the Dent play after all that long-winded explanation by the CBS crew.
Has 3 game winners, including earlier this week against Colorado State. Here he comes again. Donovan Dent in the paint. He lost it. He gives it up. Washington has to heave it. Washington, no good. Air Force stuns New Mexico 78-77. The Falcons pull off the upset at the pit.
Eric, you were at the game as well. I mean, everybody knew the ball was going in Dent's hands. What did you see on the final play? And like Rick kind of said, they built a wall, and I think maybe that's to coaching that, and don't quote me on this, Joe Scott kind of figuring out, you know, what to do in that situation. And we'll get into that later. I thought Richard Pitino was completely outcoached at home again. But your thoughts, Eric?
No, I thought that play was not totally telegraphed, but they knew what was coming and they knew what they wanted to prevent from happening. And as soon as Dent pushed the ball up the floor, once he kind of entered that 3-point line area, everyone just kind of swarmed around him. He had 2 guys on him. One guy actually knocked the ball loose, and Dent recovered it and kicked it out to the first available guy he saw, which was Drew Washington. Rick touched on it. I thought he probably had a better look at a shot there from 3 than he did, but he took one dribble to the left, took a contested shot, and it just hit off the left side of the rim. But this kind of played into that. The last 2 plays combined kind of summarized the game from an X's and O's standpoint. On the defensive side, Air Force was really focused on taking the paint away from the Lobos. I felt like they were playing off a little bit and just trying to pack the paint inside, which is what limited some touches for Toppin and Nelly. And they were trying to take a lot of the penetration away. And that's what they did on that last play for Dent. But on the play before that got Petritus open on the 3 to take the lead. I thought that's where Joe Scott and Air Force kind of took advantage of the Lobos for the entire game, mostly. What they did was Air Force is pretty long. Like, they got 3 guys at 6'7", they got a 6'8", and then a 6'4" point guard. So they're big, and the Lobos don't match up with them well. And all 5 of their guys are pretty decent on the outside. So what they did was they pulled the bigs for UNM kind of outside the paint and forced them to defend on the perimeter. And on that last play, you could see that Petritis and Bauer were kind of staggered, set the screen for a guy that came around and curled, and Toppin just overhelped. One guy made a cut to the corner for the inbound pass, which left Petritis wide open. He took a step back and wide open at the 3. So I think they kind of just outplayed the Lobos or outcoached the Lobos a little bit in some of these different scenarios, kind of took them out of their comfort zone and forced Nelly and Toppin to play the perimeter. And as we saw, basically every time down for Air Force, we just seemed out of place. Toppin and Nelly just couldn't defend the perimeter really well. And Air Force just continually beat them on the backdoor cuts. And I think the last 2 plays of the game kind of summarized that for the outcome.
Ed, just your general thoughts on the game, and then I'll play what Pete Gillen said after the play.
I think what Eric and Rick said, I think the last sequence, you talk about outcoached and outplayed, I'd say out-executed, especially that last play, Eric, when you talk about Nelly, my son said this too, Toppin overhelping. So then he has to go a long way to get to Petritis, the shooter, long way, and give Petritis, give him credit. He buried that shot, man. That's a huge shot. New Mexico had just gone up 77-75, and maybe, we're thinking, hey, they're going to skate. They're going to escape with this win, and they're going to, everything's going to be okay because they've been up and down all game long. Air Force had played pretty darn well. But when Petritis hit that shot, that's execution. Again, Toppin overhelping, and then having to come a long way, and he buried that shot. On the inbounds play, Rick, you mentioned that, and Jeff Grammer said that Joe Scott's on the floor. He's got no timeouts left. He can't call a timeout. And they've asked the conference why he was out on the floor. They've got no response yet because he shouldn't have been on the floor. And if he's got no timeouts and he's on, it's not a timeout. Why are you on the floor? That should be a T. But I promise you one thing: the referees are not going to call T in that kind of situation. They don't want to be the ones that decide the game. But that's a question there because it stopped New Mexico from giving it to Dent with full speed. They stopped it, and you let them build the wall, and so it came up short on Washington on the last shot. And I think what Jacob has said about True, and Eric, you made a point about True playing pretty decent on defense. He had some deflections. My son said the same thing, and some steals, but his shot has been off. He's not been shooting well the last 3 or 4 games. He's in a little bit of a slump. 1 of 8. So I think it begs the question why House's fourth foul was bad. He's been committing these fouls in the last couple of games that are bad. But why is a 5th-year senior on the bench, and Washington's really not been in that situation to take the final shot? So Dan had to kick it out. But I think there's some questions there at the end. Rick, I think you make a good point. The ball stopped. You got a timeout. You had a chance to call a timeout. Coach Patino did, and he chose not to. And maybe he's saying, hey, Donovan has done this. Let's let him go without a timeout and let the defense even build a bigger wall than they did. They already had a chance to build a wall. So maybe Coach Patino thought that, we're 2 for 2 and winning here. Let's let him do his thing. It didn't work out. But I think the other thing is, New Mexico, they like to hedge out. They like to hedge hard on those picks. There's a lot of fake handoffs going to the basket. The first dribble defense was horrible. It was bad yesterday. And it's strange to me because they beat them by 20 points in Colorado just a month ago. And you would have thought, and Rick, you mentioned preparation. I have to wonder about that because they know what they're going to do. They've done it before. We saw this last year against Utah State when they got backdoored to death, and the defense had been better this year. We said that. How it could collapse in a game like this with so much at stake against a 1-12 team in conference that had lost 7 straight games is really a mystery to me. It's a bad loss. There's no 2 ways about it. It's a bad loss. It really is. So that's those are my thoughts.
And here is Gillen after the play.
Biggest upset of the season in the Mountain West. Coming into the pit, where you meant before cut, it was 38-2 in favor of the Lobos. Before this, 13 in a row, New Mexico had 1.
He mentioned that is the biggest upset in the Mountain West this season. Somebody on Twitter had posed that maybe this was the worst regular season loss in UNM men's basketball history. I'm going back to you, Ed. I looked it up. I'm looking. I thought maybe nah. It's up there, I think, given what was at stake. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you know what?
And I don't mean to interrupt you there. Not biggest loss in program history. regular season history. Cal State, Fullerton, and Harvard do not count.
I can't go back and look back at the regular season. I'd have to really do again. I've been a fan since '70. There's been some, but remember, okay, so this is a team that they've made how many NCAA appearances in their history? They've made a bunch. There's been regular season losses that were tough, yes, but the team was. We're already talking about bubble, or bracketology. Where are they going to be seated? Who are they going to play? So this is one of the worst. I'm scanning my mind for Ellenberger's losses, McKay's losses, Bliss, Frischella, Patino, the whole crew, Neil Noodles, Alford, and that's one of the worst ones considering what's at stake. What's at stake, and a team that Rick and Eric. I think sometimes when you see a team like that, and you had a big win against Colorado State on Thursday, was there an emotional letdown? I wouldn't think there would be because you know what's at stake. You know what you have to do. And I don't know if you're thinking, hey, and Coach and Rick, you played, man. Sometimes, Eric, you look at the schedule and you're thinking, we just handed these dudes, but we won by 20, man. It shouldn't be no problem here, right? We're at the pit. And, you don't know if that kind of thinking comes into play. And I'm telling you that as a player, as a coach, it does. And that does, Rick, and it does too, Eric. How you could overlook this team, though. They had beaten UNLV. Eric, you made a good point, by 30. And, but New Mexico had handed them pretty easily. So back to your question, Ryan, I'd say it's one of scanning my mind and that history. I'd say to me off the charts or off in my thinking, it's got to be one of the worst regular season losses definitely in program history. I can't think there's probably worse ones, but right now I can't think of a worse one.
I think that's because it's fresh in people's minds, but it's up there. And Eric, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, Kendall Williams. I forgot who was the original poster of that tweet, but 2013, when the Lobos were number 12, lost 88-89 at Air Force. And I don't remember the 2013 year who they lost to. Was that the Harvard game?
That's the Harvard year.
So the Harvard year
in March.
But they lost that game at Air Force. This is a little bit different because of the context, because it was at the pit and there was 15,000 plus there. I felt like Air Force was probably just the hungrier team, and the Lobos just didn't come in super sharp, looking to execute at a high level. I felt like they just thought that they could roll a ball out there and still get a win. But Rick, were you going to add something?
I think like you guys are saying, that I even heard in the post-game pressers, they asked Baker and Coach Patino, how were the last practices? Was there anything you saw in practice that could have led to this? And they kind of had a stalled answer. So in my mind, that means they probably didn't have sharp practices. There probably was a little bit of a mental letdown. And it's just human nature as an athlete after coming down after that big emotional win against Colorado State. Probably a little bit of a letdown, and like you guys are hitting on, just the mental strength was not there on the pick and roll. They're doing the same thing that is Air Force over and over again, similar how they run the triple option in football. They're running the same motion offense, the same backdoors, and UNM just made Air Force look like the Harlem Globetrotters. I don't think Air Force probably has that many dunks on the season as they had against us. It was almost unexplainable what we were watching out there, just the lack of effort and not knowing where to be on defense.
One of the things I'm looking at the 3-point shooting, and I'll get to various other topics. I mean, defensive adjustments, and the first thing that came to my mind with my terrible pop culture references was Butter saying Becker in one of the episodes of South Park. So there it is. Bo Becker was 3 of 8 from 3-point land. He had 19 total points, 8 of 17 for the game. Ritas Petritis, 6 of 11 from field goal. He hit 2 threes. He was 2 of 3, obviously none bigger than the last. Ethan Taylor, 4 of 13, 3 of 9 from 3-point. He hit a lot of crucial ones. Luke Kearney is a name you haven't heard. 3 of 5 from the field, 2 of 2 for 3. He had 8 points. They were 11 of 25 from 3, while the Lobos were 3 of 16. Speaking of shooting free throws, and I'm wearing the hat, it's on backwards. UNM was 18 of 27 from the free throw line. Air Force was 5 of 7. There were some early ones on that I think JT Toppin missed. But I would think that that's it. The defensive adjustments, man. I don't know, Eric. You kind of touched on it. And you had kind of texted us during the game, like nobody knew where the hell to be. And it was just a bunch of backdoor, like, I don't know. And they did it with threes. I know that they didn't have a timeout there. And this is the same week that Patino, I'm all over the place. This is the same game. This is the same week that Naismith is a Naismith finalist for Coach of the Year. He's one of 15. I mean, I didn't think he was going to win it anyway. He has done a good job this year. I think in moments he hasn't done it. He's been outcoached. Saturday was one of them. And any running of Coach of the Year, I think Danny Sprinkle's running away with it. And I think Danny Sprinkle should be in running for Coach of the Year with Mountain West and the nation. But I don't know. I thought everything was just, they didn't care. And another thing that I wanted to hit on was, Nick and I were there at the game. He went. I wanted him to see what it was like to do this from our perspective. And obviously I know he does it for ProView, but there was an announced crowd of 15,011. And it just felt like 6 minutes. We looked around and right before the national anthem, and I looked at Nick and I was like, not a lot of people here. And they all trickled in. I just felt maybe the fans didn't care. The team didn't care. They were going to walk all over them. And I know I say it a lot on this podcast in the year and 14, 15 months we've been doing this. Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, like Mike Tyson said. But Eric, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on it, but I felt like they came in with a better game plan. They were ready.
Yeah, I'm going to leave Rick to the defensive adjustments or just adjustments in general, but I'm approaching this from an Air Force perspective. I think Joe Scott came in with a really well executed game plan, and Air Force, those guys are smart, man. They're sharp, and they played at a high level and they executed at a high level. That's what Ed was mentioning. But if you want to break down from like the 3-point perspective and some of the dunks that they were getting, some of the layups, the first half, I felt like Air Force really kind of imposed their will on some of the ball movement, some of the backdoor screens, the slips, moving the ball well. And then the Lobos just kind of playing into those traps where they were overplaying, over hedging, and just kind of getting stuck in these positions where they were letting guys break loose easy to the basket. And so in the first half, Air Force hit 3 threes. So they were getting a lot of their points from those backdoor cuts, those slips. We saw a lot of those guys get dunks. I know Becker probably had like 3 or 4 on his own. And it was just the Lobos kind of overplaying that a little bit too much. And then in the second half, I felt like Joe Scott probably anticipated that the Lobos were going to make a defensive adjustment and try to clamp down and not try to overplay some of those and really just try to defend the paint. And when they did that, they stopped overplaying those screens. They stopped over hedging, which allowed Air Force to kind of get open from behind the 3. So Air Force hit 3 threes in the first half. They hit 8 in the second half. So Joe Scott just kind of well executed game plan, knowing what the Lobos were going to come in and do and how they were going to defend it. I think they just did it better than Patino did. And the energy was probably a little bit to that. And I'm going to defer over to Rick because I know Rick made some really good points with some of the defensive adjustments or lack thereof. But I thought Air Force just did a good job, and they made the shots when they needed to. So kudos to them. 11 total threes, 8 threes in one half, though. That was the significant piece in the second half, and that was the backbreaker.
Yeah, and I think,
Rick,
when we're just talking about New Mexico, you're hitting it on the head, Eric. They weren't prepared for when Nelly and Toppin were showing on the screens for the screen man to slip to the hoop and how many times they got that easy shot. And these are just my thoughts on Patino, not the thoughts of the show. But what I'm seeing is a lack of implementing a culture on this team overall. If you look at San Diego State, even Utah State, it seems like their coach has implemented a culture around the team where everyone is bought into something. And when I watch the Lobos, I kind of see a AAU team that's built up with stars, but they're not all bought in sometimes to the same purpose. And we could see the frustration on Toppin's face in the second half. He didn't get the ball very often. There wasn't a good game plan to get the ball to the posts. And sometimes it comes down to practicing the little things like entry passes at practice. How many times did they give bounce passes to Nelly or Toppin where they just couldn't handle it? Let's face it, Nelly has 2 spatulas for hands sometimes, and he can't catch the ball. You know where it's a lot easier to catch? Up here. How many times have they gotten an actual good entry pass where they can catch it rather than at their ankles? Not very often in the last couple of games, and you can see it on Toppin's face. And that bleeds into defense. When you're not involved on offense, sometimes you slack off on D, mental errors occur. And I don't know about leaving Washington in down the stretch. For me, he was effective on defense, but on offense, he's 1 for 8, like we said, wouldn't pull the trigger on some shots, and you got House waiting on the bench. Really confusing game for me. And on the defensive end, that's where the question is, why can't the Lobos play a zone? All the other teams in the conference have switched to a zone against us, yet I don't think we've played zone once the entire season. And some of these games call for it when you're getting killed on man-to-man defense. So just a lot of open questions, and just the bigger question of what kind of culture is really being instilled in this team, because I don't see it right now.
Ed, I'm going to go to you. Nick brought this up. UNM only forced 8 turnovers. Then you had mentioned that in Colorado Springs, they forced 18 and scored 26 points off those turnovers. I mean, that was kind of the thing that you guys were talking about just in text messages during the game yesterday, that there are no lost my train of thought there. Sorry. That they are they are not getting the ball down low. But when you have that pressure, when you force those kinds of turnovers and win, and to not do that at home and of all places in the pit, I don't know where this team goes from there. I mean, that, and by the way, it's they've lost 3 out of their last 4 home games. The NCAA tournament committee will frown upon that.
They will, especially the loss to a 1-12 team that in the conference that had lost 7 straight and had not beaten New Mexico at the pit in 17 years. That's I don't want to belabor the point. That's a bad loss. But I think all the things that we've talked about here, you talked about defensive adjustments, Rick, and you're not wrong there. The culture, but I think too, Ryan, you said maybe they didn't care, but I got to say this: it was Air Force. I think so. People are coming in the pit. Well, Air Force is 1-12. This should be a gimme win. We've beat them here for 17 straight years. There's no way we lose this game. They're 18.5 points underdogs here. So I think a lot of those things, and I've been in games like that. So have you, Eric and Rick. When you're losing to an opponent, you think you should beat, and you're thinking to yourself, we're still going to beat them. We're going to beat them. I know we're going to beat them. And then things start snowballing, and you still say we're going to beat them. We go up, and then you say we're still going to win, and it doesn't happen because of all the things that you and Eric talked about. The lack of defensive discipline. The offensive, the zone point is a good point, Rick. One of my friends called me yesterday. Why don't they play a zone? And I can't answer that because they haven't played it. The other thing about the entry passes, who's the best guy that puts the entry passes, gives the best entry pass? A lot of them are shorter guards. Mashburn and Dent and House are short, 6'1", 6'2". And, I don't know, they have great sightlines, but who gives sometimes you have to dribble over, make a nice pass in there, throw it to where they live. You said that, Rick. Throw it up high, right? Throw it at a good target. Give me a good seal down low. Give me a target, seal them, and then throw it to where they can get it and score, catch and score. I don't know that we have the best post-entry passers. I don't think we do. I really don't. It's been proven. Nelly topping the second single-digit scoring for the second straight game. They need to give him more touches. That's obvious. The guy dominates. And Rick, you're absolutely right. When a big's not getting fed, they're going to get a little frustrated, man. They're going to get frustrated and maybe not concentrate as much because they're thinking, man, where am I going to get a touch? I'm not getting the ball. They do think that, believe me. So I think all those things came into play. Air Force, give them credit. They knocked down 11 threes. Eric, you mentioned New Mexico made some adjustments at the half defensively. They did, and Air Force buried them threes, man. They still had to bury them, right? They still had to make them, and they did. And so I think Joe Scott had a great plan. They executed it to perfection. And, to New Mexico's demise, again, going up by 2, and then Petraeus hits a sequence of events at the end that Air Force executed better than UNM did. It's bottom line. And, New Mexico finds themselves on the short end of that.
I want to add something to that real quick, Ryan. Because you asked a question about the turnovers, and that's something that UNM has always thrived on, is creating turnovers, creating ball pressure, and creating extra possessions. Extra shot attempts too. But in this game, Air Force had 60 shot attempts, UNM had 60, so they were identical, and it literally came down to a 1 possession game. But to the steals, Lobos had 3 steals this game. I mean, there's been some games this season that House has had 6 on his own, and he only played half a game. And yeah, I kind of a mystery why he didn't get many minutes in the second half. I think he was pulled at the 17-minute mark, which Ed referred to, and he didn't check back in. So I'm not sure what had happened there. I think has a lot of people kind of scratching their head too. But I didn't see a lot of full court press, something that the Lobos like to do, getting teams to kind of run out of their comfort zone, speeding them up a little bit. I felt like Air Force just controlled the entire pace of the game. They got into their half court pretty easily and then just did whatever they wanted to. And the Lobos defense just didn't really force them into any weird situations that they weren't used to. And I think that kind of played into why they didn't create many turnovers, why the pace stayed at the pace that it did. Just not the type of style that the Lobos like to play. And they didn't really do much to kind of try to change that.
I didn't mean to go all over the place. I just felt like there was so much to tackle in this game because the implications and what happened. I had saw that this morning, and I think Jeff Grammer wrote it in the Journal that it was 17 straight wins against Air Force at home, 18.5-point underdog. That would be a Steve Kirkland question of UNM Athletic Media Relations Department. When was the last time they lost to as a favorite like that? And I don't know the House reason. I know he had 4 fouls at that 17-minute mark, right? I was trying to look when he was taken out, and Nick and I were talking, Ed, if they were like looking at him for any kind of injury, but it was, and Eric, you were there. It was so deflating after the game. Like you couldn't, usually that place is amped up and it's felt like a nightclub sometimes this year, but man, that was a rough post game. And the vibe was really weird in there.
Yeah. Well, it
felt like the season had been sucked away,
Fans didn't leave immediately either, which there were, as soon as the buzzer sounded, there were a lot of people just kind of standing around in silence. Essentially is what it was. People were just standing there trying to figure out what just happened. And you could hear a pin drop in the pit, and Air Force, you could hear those guys celebrating on the court. And it took a while for people to kind of hit the exits because they were all just standing around like, what the hell just happened? And we hung out until the very end. And as it emptied, and there was just kind of like this weird feeling that had left the pit. And I think, stunned was probably the best way to describe it. Like an awkward type silence, not much to say. I know that people called in to Kenny and Brandon's show afterwards, and people were pretty upset. I even think Clayton Shields joined the conversation too, and they kind of all alluded to Toppin and Nelly not getting a whole lot of touches, defensive adjustments not really being made. I think a lot of people are kind of on the same page there, but yeah, it was definitely a weird feeling at the end of that game when people were just kind of standing around trying to figure out what had just happened.
And have you
Somebody
guys?
we didn't talk about that had Go ahead.
I just staying on that same topic. Have you guys ever heard people boo before in the pit as they were booing yesterday? I can't recall a time where I've heard boos against the Lobos.
It felt very
And
Philadelphia and very New York Giants this year, where they were booing their own team. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Ed. No, Rick. No, I can't.
I can't either. But I can remember the specific play that drew the loudest boo, and it was a three that Air Force had hit that Patino had to call a timeout right after because he was wide open. And it was essentially some of the Lobos guys just kind of walking around on defense, not really making uh an emotional effort or like a really committed effort to trying to get stops. They just looked a little befuddled and not really clear on what to do. But yeah, that's I think when everyone started to hit the panic button a little bit.
Ed, I'm going to pose that question to you. Can you remember any time where they got booed?
You know what? I can't. And I've been, how many pit games I've been to, and yeah, I've heard groans and yeah, what the heck's going on? I've heard that a lot of collective groans from the crowd, but never have I heard them be booed. And that's not to say that it hasn't happened. I'm sure it has, but I don't remember when. I can't recall a time that I heard that.
Somebody that has hit the wrong button there on my mixer. Sorry about that. Somebody that has had, we still say, has had a tremendous flip the script since the calendar year, and it's like it's the same old song and dance, but a positive note on what we're talking about is Mustafa Amzil. He only played 12 minutes though, but he was 3 of 4 and he had 6 points and he got like a couple of key rebounds and made a couple of key plays. I don't know if anybody else thought, he came in off the bench and a spark, but I something we mentioned, like, where's Quentin Webb? Where is Isaac Mushila? True Washington played 5 minutes and took the game-winning shot, or attempted to take the game-winning shot. Oh, excuse me. No, that was halftime stats. He played 12 minutes in the second half. So
20 minutes on the game for Amzil. 20 minutes on the game.
I'm looking at the wrong stat sheet. Sorry, 20 minutes on the game for Amzil. 6 of 8. Missed 1 3-pointer, 12 points. I'm sorry, that was one of the halves. But I thought he played more than that. I was like, what the hell? And True Washington plays 17 minutes, 1 of 8, 0 for 3 from 3. Missed 2 free throws. I'm sorry about that. I was looking at the wrong stat sheet. But he's still played well. And, he finishes with 12 points, 6 rebounds. You got to commend him. He felt like the spark off the bench. I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, I think he's been, their most consistent player. And like we're mentioned about the substitution patterns, Washington got 18 minutes where the previous few games, I think he got under 5. So just wondering why Amzil or House wasn't in down the stretch still this morning while we're thinking about it. But Baker has really not produced the last 3 or 4 games either. He was 0 for 1 last night on a 3. Only 1 rebound for him. I think he was minus 15 in his 9 minutes. He was dreadful on defense yesterday afternoon. So also against Colorado State, their bench did not win the bench battle there. So I think it's tough when you have Mash and House not shooting high percentages. You need somebody else to fill the void in terms of scoring. And Amzil did what he was asked yesterday. I just think he actually deserves some more playing time.
Yeah, I think Amzil played well. And this is me not just kind of referring to his height and length, but I thought that he matched up with some of the Air Force guys a little bit better than having our 6'2" and under 3 guards out on the floor at the same time. But he's, like, as far as being able to be versatile and more athletic on the floor than maybe a JT Toppin or Nelly, moving sideline to sideline on the defensive side of the floor, I felt like he was able to kind of step in and challenge some of the Air Force guys around the perimeter, but also be able to defend the rim when they're trying to get closer to the basket, like inside the paint. That's where Amzil, I thought, did the biggest or had the biggest impact on the game. And then on the offensive side, obviously he converted 6 out of his 8 shot attempts and he wasn't afraid. But when they were getting the ball into the paint to him, he was around usually the elbow area. And I think that's where he's most effective because he can actually dump it down low, create some weird mismatches down there. He can get to the basket because he is versatile and quick enough, but he can also extend the defense a little bit. So when he is on the floor, they're a different looking team. And I don't know who said it. I'm going to give the credit to Kenny Thomas on this, but he was talking about Amzil kind of playing that 4 spot, and when he is in that 4 spot, he opens up the floor for UNM because he can play or he can shoot from the outside, but when he has to go inside, he can also do some damage there. When you got a 4-5 of Toppin and Nelly, you have 2 guys kind of working the paint in there, and it just kind of crowds the area a little bit. So when you have a 4 guy that can stretch the floor, it opens it up for guys like Dent, for guys like House and Mashburn to get to the basket. So I think that when Patino starts putting him in and he makes immediate impacts, that's probably the reason why.
Anybody have a comment on that?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a good point there, and you'd like to play him more at the 3 right now. At the 4, he's effective, and sometimes having to guard 4s, he's not. Now he did a good job at San Diego State. He did a very good job. He's not a natural 4 defender. We know that. But he really stuck his face in there against Ledee, and I thought he battled him as hard as he could. He really did. Now, at the beginning of the year, we looked at this bench, and we thought, hey, they got Mushila here, they've got Webb here, Applehands might see some time, and that's not come conference time. He cut that off. Sebastian Forstein had gotten some minutes earlier in the season, and then when conference play started, we've barely seen Mushila the last couple of games. A couple minutes here and there. He hasn't played very much. Webb not at all. Washington got a lot of minutes yesterday, has been, was inconsistent yesterday, it's on the offensive end, played some decent D. Baker, you mentioned that, Rick. Once he stands straight up on D, again, give him credit against Nevada, played good defense on that last possession. But if he stands straight up, boom, they're right by him. He got torched yesterday. He really did. So the most consistent guy that we've had off of the bench all season long has been Amzil. He really has. He started out rough. It's a rough start for him, very rough start. Did not play against New Mexico State. And then after that, he really found his groove. And I think they need, as you mentioned, they need him more on the floor. I think he does, provide the shooting and the inside presence when they needed it. When Nelly and Toppin get in foul trouble, he goes in there and does a good job. He's been very consistent. And the bench has not been. We thought it was going to be a much stronger bench. I thought Webb was going to play, these other guys, and they haven't. So the bench production outside of Amzil has been inconsistent.
The gentleman that tweeted out, was this one of the worst regular season losses in program history, was at Noah CB_. Somebody had mentioned the 1991 loss to Eastern New Mexico in the pit was worse. Ed, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
I do. My friend told me that yesterday. I was talking to one of my best friends, and he says to me, I said, that's one of the worst losses. He goes, no, Ed, they'd lost to Eastern, and that was a bad loss when Coach Bliss was here, and Steve Logan and some other players, Ike Williams, Kahari Jackson, I believe, lost to that team, and that was a bad loss. Yes, that was a bad loss. And, and I think I remember that pretty well. But this is a conference loss. Again, that's not to downgrade with it. Eastern beat New Mexico in 1991. They did, but this is a conference loss to a 1-12 team. You're going to the NCAA tournament. This is to me a way different loss than that loss was. This loss here has implications seeding wise, or whether you go to the tournament or not. So this to me is a way worse loss. But I'm not saying that Eastern New Mexico loss wasn't. I remember reading the paper the next day, like, what the heck happened here, man? There's no way you can lose to Eastern, but they did. But again, this loss to me is worse. It really is. Again, because of the reasons I mentioned.
I would say probably more embarrassing is Eastern New Mexico, but most devastating loss in program history might have been that yesterday. UNM still scored 48 points in the paint. Air Force had 38. And then the bench points for Air Force 23-16. I mean, but that's already been said. We know that.
Yeah, but those points in the paint that Air Force got, a lot of them weren't even contested. Like they weren't their bigs down there going to work trying to battle against Nelly and Toppin, because they couldn't. Nelly and Toppin were having to defend the 3-point line, right? So I think that played into what Air Force was trying to do and executing at pulling the bigs out of the paint, opening up the lane for those blow-bys, those backdoor cuts. I think it just played perfectly into the hands of Air Force, and they executed. Like, kudos to them for doing that. It's just the Lobos had to be a little bit more methodical about how they defended that, and I think Amzil should have seen a little bit more minutes than on the defensive side, being able to move laterally and cover more ground that way. Because I think it was Ed or maybe it was Rick that had mentioned that those guys were just really slow at kind of recovering when they did overhedge or overhelp, having to recover on the shooters. And when they did, they were jumping at all the ball fakes and getting blown by and easy layups to the basket.
And then when you look on the other side, Air Force's defense, they had a great game plan. Even when New Mexico was able to get the ball down inside to Nelly, like the announcers were screaming at UNM to do, they would double down immediately onto Nelly or onto Toppin, and they knew the plan. They forced us into 3 for 16 3-point shooting. That's exactly what they won. And even though the Lobos, it's the type of game you would think they would win in the paint battle, dominating the boards, 22 fast break points to 1. Sometimes it comes down to the detail, and Air Force was definitely just better coached and prepared.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, Jacob didn't join us, but I think one of the topics is killing the Mountain West, killing the NCAA tournament bid. I think it's not good. 3 of 4 at home, and you barely beat CSU, who just lost to UNLV. I think the committee is going to frown upon that. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that, but I think pending, stealing one at Boise, stealing one at Utah State. And again, I apologize. I didn't know that they controlled their own destiny when we did after the CSU game. Well, now, not looking good. Probably might, depending on what happens, probably might have to be playing on Wednesday in the Mountain West Conference tournament. But does anybody have any thoughts on the NCAA tournament bid, that bubble bursting?
Yeah, I do. I think, you mentioned that for all the reasons that game was, a horrible loss. Now, I got to say this too, though. Now, what's the going forward? How do you recover from that? And, as a team, and Coach Pitino has to get together and talk about that. How do they move on? They got Boise State and Utah State left. I have to ask this. What's Jalen House's mentality? He didn't go back in the game. That guy's the Energizer bunny, plays off the energy, plays off the crowd, plays off of whoever. So you got to wonder what his mentality is, because if I'm a fifth-year senior and I didn't go back into the game, I'm out the whole second half, I know I'm pretty ticked. So you kind of wonder, again, what's his mentality, and Coach Pitino saying, you went with the freshman. We like his energy. That's what Coach Pitino said. That's his right to play whoever he wants. So if you're House, and I'm reading that and I'm thinking that I'm ticked. I'm mad. I know I would be, because I was used to playing. I know Eric and Rick, you guys were used to playing too. So I did kind of wonder about the team mentality going forward. They need, if they win one at Boise State and Utah State, hey, look, all of, they're back in the saddle. Again, I'm not saying they're automatically in the tournament. Those would be 2 good wins. Does that erase that loss? No, it doesn't. So there's a long road to climb up. There really is. And I'm not saying they can't win. I don't want people to think we're negative and we don't want them to win. Of course we do. They've just got a longer and tougher road now because of that loss yesterday. So does the tournament frown upon that loss? You bet they do. It's more than a frown, man. It's more like, oh my God, they lost to these dudes. Are you serious? So yeah, it's there's things that can still happen. They can still get. What if they went on a nice run at the Mountain West tournament? They've done that before. Let's not say that they can't do that. They've taken over the Thomas and Mack and made it the Pitt West. That could still happen. Let's hope that happens. But for right now, there's a lot of things inside that locker room that I kind of wonder what's going on, and how Coach Pitino, and he'll get them together today. They'll talk, watch film, do whatever they got to do. But there's some guys probably a little bit upset, and you got to, and House is that guy that plays off of that. He wasn't there, the last 17 minutes. So those are just my questions going forward, and they certainly still can't get a berth, but it's a longer road now.
Yeah, well, he was definitely fired up when he was taken out with that 4th foul. But that's
say hi, Aiden.
Hi.
Hey, buddy.
Sorry to interject there.
Hey, buddy.
No,
what's going on, man?
Say hi to Rick, Ed, and Eric.
Oh,
Hi.
Benny's upstairs. What's up, dude? But yeah, House was after the buzzer sounded, I did see him. He was the first one off the bench in the line, shaking the hands of the Air Force guys. A little more. He was respectful. He was still animated, but that's just his demeanor. And he sprinted up the ramp, right? He would just probably wanted to get the hell out of there. But the thing that with House is he didn't see a lot of minutes, right? He had what 70, what did he play? How many minutes? 18 minutes total, 17 minutes. I'm looking now.
Who was it, House?
House. 19 minutes. So
19.
he played a half. But he had 4 fouls in those 19 minutes. And I think I've seen all the same officials minus the one female ref that was there. I don't know her name. But I think they're out there. They're not out there to get him, but they just know the style that House plays with. And they were quick to call him on some of those reach-ins. They're just not going to buy his BS anymore. And they want to call a clean game. And yeah, you can always say that some of those calls are questionable, but they know how House plays. So they're going to officiate him tighter, and they know how he can be very animated on the court. So they want to keep that in check too. They don't want to get shown up, right? Ed, you know how that is. They're trying to keep him in control, and he didn't make any adjustments to back down. He still played that. I know he was trying to push the pressure or push the pace of the game, and that's what House does. But on the defensive side, he's got to be to this point where he is got to understand that he is more important to this team on the floor than he is on the bench. And I thought that him not playing a majority of the second half definitely contributed to that. But I mean, picking up 4 fouls in 19 minutes, man, that's a little reckless to me, right? That's just looking at it from a numbers perspective. And I know that's just the style of play that he likes to play with. But I mean, you got to reel it back, and you got to know that, hey, once you pick up your second or third, maybe I got to tone it down here a little bit. And he picked up that 4th foul early in the second half and straight to the bench, man. That's where they can't afford to have House at.
Yeah, I thought it was a little weird he wasn't on the floor. I thought maybe he was hurt. But nobody asked that, I think, post game. So
Patino did address it in the post game presser.
Did he?
He referred to feeling that True had been in the game long enough to where he had like a better rhythm. He felt comfortable with how he was playing in there. And that's why he decided to keep him in the game at the very end. But to me, I think Rick would even agree with me. And he even said something earlier, like, you just have to have House in the game in those moments.
He's your emotional leader too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did you want to say something else about that?
No, you have to put him back in. He's your emotional leader. He's got a good communication with all the guys, and even if he's had a tough game, we saw what he did the game before. He made that huge shot against Colorado State to even give us a chance to make the final play. So you have to have him in there, regardless if Washington is scoring 1,000 points. I don't care. You have to take Washington out and put House in, or somebody else out for House. Take Mash out. I'm fine with that.
Which let me make a point. Yeah, it even makes it even stranger that he wasn't in there. You mentioned the shot against Colorado State. You're in an amazing shot, right? Bakes it in 6 or 7 feet, and so you need a guy to make a shot at the end of the game. And no offense to Washington, Rick, you said that if he scores 1,000 points, great. But this is your 5th-year senior, your emotional leader, and sometimes the emotions run away. That's who he is. But that he wouldn't be in that situation is really kind of perplexing to me, because
they had Baker at the desk to check in and not House,
right?
And then Baker went back, so that's even more confusing.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, again, I thought he was going to be the X factor. He has not looked good against San Diego State, Colorado State. I think he's hit like 1-3 in the last 4 or 5 games. It's kind of.
Well, the good news is they have a week off here, right, to prepare for the home stretch, and should have some time to figure some of these wrinkles out and have a better game plan for these last 3 with having this stretch of time, we can hope.
One quick comment on Baker is, again, remember one thing. This is a 3-guard dominated offense. He's not going to get no looks, man. When he gets looks, it's like, oh, you better hit it, because in his mind, he may not get a look for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. So I think he's still, he's a shooter, right? That we don't see shoot because those guys have the ball and they're going to, distribute when they want to. He's made some shots, but I think overall it's been disappointing. We all thought he's one of the oldest guys in Division I. He's played at Arizona, Kentucky, Fresno State. He's been around. He knows how to make shots. I don't think he forgot how to shoot. He just doesn't get any looks. So, that's the way. 9 minutes yesterday, no points, and that's pretty much been the story most of the season.
Does anybody have any final thoughts before we get to Snake of the Week? I will take that as a no. All right, Snake of the Week. I'm going to give it to
This is the Snake of the Week.
there he is finally. I'm going to give it to Ritas Petritis. I thought that was a great play. And Joe Scott, I thought that was a great play call, a great shot, and you quiet one of the most ruckus arenas in the all of the country. Rick, I'll go to you.
Man, this is tough to pick someone on UNM that I was impressed with. I'm just going to give it to the whole Air Force team. The discipline that they showed obviously is instilled in them from what they do on a daily basis serving this country. So just hats off to those young men. They got a lot less time in the gym than all the other teams, and they still executed and did it. So hats off just to the whole Air Force team.
Eric.
I'm going to have to give it to Umzil for answering the bell whenever they needed someone to go to get a bucket. And on the defensive side, I think he played probably the best well-rounded game out of any Lobo this game. And you could just see it. He made an immediate impact and thought he should have seen more minutes.
Ed, to you.
I got to give it to Joe Scott. He had a great game plan. I think he coached his game plan was very good. I think he watched a lot of film. He talked to his players on how they would attack New Mexico's defense. The bottom line is they executed. They buried those threes, man. They did. You have to make those shots. Petraeus, man, that's a huge three. Again, he's wide open, but it's a huge three. So I got to give it to Joe Scott. I think he did a great job of coaching. I hate to give it to any opponent against the Lobos. I really do. But I've got to give it to Joe Scott yesterday.
But I'm going to the Boise game. They don't play during the week. The UNM men's basketball team, they play at. They get the week off. They play at Boise, Boise State next Saturday, March 2nd. Tip is at 6:30. Games on CBS Sports Network, and as always, you can listen to the game on the Lobo Radio Network. That's a big one. I don't know where they go from here. I think maybe they will have to rely. We might have a different conversation if they beat Boise State and if they beat Utah State in the road. And obviously, those are two tough tasks. I was about to say it's hard to win on the road in this league, and look at what Air Force did yesterday. But as always, give us a like. Check us out on Instagram. You can follow us there at the Pit Press NM, and you can follow us on Twitter at the Pit Press NM. Visit our website at thepitpressnm.com. Check us out on YouTube. Give us a like, subscribe at the bottom. Ed and I had a great conversation with the 1998 co-WAC Player of the Year, Mr. Clayton Shields, who was a big proponent of those late 90s teams, the Lobo Legend series that we do on here, exclusively on the Pit Press. And it was great yesterday to see all the Lobo Legends, that the alumni that they brought on the floor at halftime, and they were acknowledged. So talk to some of those guys and maybe we'll get them on. But on behalf of Rick Thompson, Ed Nunez, and Eric Malton, my name is Ryan Tamori. We will come to you before Boise State. We'll have an episode out probably for that. And then probably live from Boise, Extra Mile Arena there, since I'll be there. And then post Boise State. But thanks, guys. Looking forward to talking to you next time.